You're saying that geopolitical mix is becoming very, very risky and more of a consideration than it was prior.
It has an impact, a distracting impact to the leadership, to the people, the investors, everybody involved in the region. This is like a direct impact now in Qatar. But I think, of course, the GCC, they're not easily provoked, but I would say they can be distracted.
Welcome to You're in Business. We're joined by Mohammed Al-Suwaid. He's the founder and CEO of Razeen Capital, one of Saudi Arabia's newest CMA licensed investment houses. Mohammed, I look at global markets and it often feels like we're one tweet away from chaos. From your vantage point and based on your experience, how does the Saudi investor base view this moment in history?
Well, I think at one side, they're excited. And at one other side, they're just waiting and looking carefully at what's happening all around the place. But at one point, they're excited about what's happening in the international markets.
The U.S. tariff announcements, I want to dig deeper into that and its sort of impact on Saudi Arabia. I appreciate the IMF has done its homework and they're saying the impact is close to zero. I'm wondering what you're hearing from other investors and what you're seeing on the ground. Would that add up to the IMF assessment?
Well, yeah, absolutely. There's not much of trade between the U.S. and Saudi that, in terms of a lot of goods and commodities or services, it's either government related defense or it's just some exports, a little bit of import, but that not much of serious or significant, I would say, amount of trade that would, make a tariff actually have an impact directly on Saudi.
I want to talk a bit more about the Saudi economy and the ongoing diversification strategies. You've spent a bit of time in the government as well, so you had a kind of a front row seat to how these plans come to life. If you had to make an assessment today about where everything is, would you say the Saudi economy is in good shape?
Oh, absolutely. When we talk about the Saudi economy, resilience and also from credit and all the other parts, I think the Saudi economy is doing great. Even the reliance on oil that we used to have that would have a serious impact on the way of the growth or the government spending or anything that has related to oil, it has less impacts nowadays than it used to be before Vision 2030. And I can say that the most important thing that happened to the economy was the change in fiscal policy in the beginning.
I caught a post by Tarek Fadlallah, who's the CEO of Nomura, and he wrote that after checking some of the official numbers, that despite promising diversification, and this is a direct quote, initiatives across the GCC, the fundamental structure of these economies remains heavily dependent on hydrocarbons, especially in terms of exports. So sure, diversification has accelerated, but in terms of the totality of impact relative to exports is still very, very small. What do you say to that assessment?
Well, it's not quite accurate, but I would say, of course, we're still dependent on oil revenues on a way or another. But is that connected directly to the economy? No, I think there were some big changes in the past 3 years. There was a tax introduced, and now that actually make up more than I would say 25% of the revenue. And it's increasing. I wouldn't say rapidly, of course, but I would say it is increasing modestly recently. But yes, there has been some good progress in transformation. It's not It's not a lot, but we shouldn't expect to happen for a lot of things to happen in 10 years. I mean, such transformation usually takes 30 to 40 to 50 years, depends on how much or how significant is the transformation in there. But of course, if we would say that there's something left from the impact of oil on the economy, is the mentality of policymakers.
I mean, this old habit of cutting spending when oil prices are low. What you're hearing is that they're likely to do that again, you're saying the jury's still out when oil prices get quite a bit lower, and that stays for a prolonged period of time. More policymakers get nervous, and that's when the real test is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, in my opinion and in my observation, I think there's still some concern about falling oil prices. You can see it that clearly in the Ministry of Finance statements every year. There is a budget approved, especially when they talk about expansionary policies during tight times. There'll be some like strings attached for approving that, and we heard that like several budget statements and stuff back then. And now recently, I mean, like the first thing they have done this year was we will review our priorities, and then we read at the IMF report that they're willing to cut spending if the oil prices fall further.
I mean, the ambition is for the kingdom to secure global capital flows beyond the tourist capital, right, that are chasing headlines, and kind of create sort of stickier institutional capital that's going to be around through the cycles you just mentioned, when oil prices aren't high, when oil prices are low, when times are tough. Mm-hmm. Is the kingdom a step, quite a bit closer to that reality, or?
I think so, but what I'm really concerned about right now is the level of risk in the region. The geopolitical risk is still present in the calculations or the assessments from all stakeholders involved in the process. But otherwise, I think we're getting used to the new reality, where there's more of an institutionalized way of dealing with public policy. You've seen the structure of the governance of the vision implementation, where they had the programs, the VRP offices or VRO offices back then when it started. And there was like
VRO. Sorry to interrupt, but VRO is the Vision Realization Office, just for our global audience. Is that right?
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it started with that, like offices, and then it turned to VRP, the programs, and now I can see that we're morphing into something else. We still don't know what, because but it's 2040, and I think that's a necessity. It's a necessity, in my opinion, after spending over a decade implementing the first initial, let's say, initiatives and achieving most of these goals as the government announced. I think it's about time that we're move from this milestone to another, especially in these times where geopolitical events are actually taking really interesting turns.
When you say geopolitics, I mean, you're talking about the latest attack and escalation from Israel into the skies of Qatar and hitting the capital, Doha, which is, unheard of in the Gulf's history, right? So you're saying that geopolitical mix is becoming very, very risky and more of a consideration than it was prior, right? So you're saying this is another deterioration, right? Another milestone. Am I understanding that correctly?
Absolutely. Because I don't think like there are some parties in the region that want the GCC to flourish and grow and become like a significant player in the world powers and all. And these things that happens in the region, actually, they're not like hurting directly or significantly directly into the economy, but it has an impact, a distracting impact to the leadership, to the people, the investors, everybody involved in the region. Like this is like a direct impact now in Qatar. Is it going to get involved? Is it going to like not get involved? How the escalation, if there's an escalation, how it look like? So, but I think, of course, the GCC, the leaders, the GCC policymakers, they're not like easily provoked, and but I would say they can be distracted. So that's actually, I think that's the challenge that I think that the region would face, especially that we're in a very critical situation where a milestone that has to take place.
I want to sort of better understand what that might mean for local stocks in the kingdom. It's underperformed in 2025. You've explained a little bit the economic concerns and the geopolitical variables that are playing into that. But for anybody looking at this underperformance as an opportunity and looking to diversify away from overvalued US stocks, how do they go about finding the right names in the kingdom? What would your advice be?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, like, before I answer this question, let me just tell you something. Like with the amount that being invested by foreign direct investments in the stock market, it's actually increasing, and it's been increasing significantly since last year. So I think many of the foreign investment still look at the prices, the stock market attractive, and has big potentials. The other thing is that for an investment, if we're talking about the capital markets, the stock market, for example, there are some local factors that play. There are some local factors that plays into what happened now in the momentum, but overall, I think there's a big discount in the market, and one of those is because of the I would say the whipsaws in the fiscal policy direction, and the other sudden regulations in the real estate that related to the fees on the MT line. That causes a lot of confusion into the sentiment and the confidence of investors. That gives them like a push to pause for a while, and that, of course, that's reflected directly into the stock market.
Yeah, those are incredible numbers. And I noticed as well that the policymakers were able to get international brokers to start making Saudi stocks available on some of the very popular platforms. That happened. One of the biggest brokers as well. It's kind of giving access to a long list of investors. For everybody watching a bit later in the show, we're going to talk about an asset class which is likely to see huge momentum in 2026. So make sure you watch all the way to the end. Mohammed, can you just flesh out your observations on how retail investors are approaching stocks?
Well, only recently I think there's two types of them, honestly, in Saudi. It's like the ones that had gained so experience in investing in the stock market. They're trading directly into the market, and you can see how much they've been investing heavily in the past, I would say 8 months, since August last year, 12 months. But compared to those retail that invested through public mutual funds, they're experiencing the first, I would say, correction in the market, or panic modes, and they're putting more pressure on those public mutual funds through redemptions, and causing these funds to sell and liquidate more to get to respond to these redemptions. but overall, I think the retail sector in Saudi, I mean, like it's still growing, and it's growing like really nicely and significantly, from hundreds, like in hundreds of thousands of new accounts and new investors every year from both female and male.
So I spent a little bit of time in Riyadh growing up, and one of the sort of shocks that came through was Black February of 2006. And I'm wondering to what extent the trauma from that, still weighs on sentiment in some way or another. Would you say now we're 20 years on, a new set of pretty much a new generation of investors has emerged that might not feel as traumatized from their wealth evaporating in the period of 4 weeks?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's a long gone history right now. By now, like we have like a new generation actually of investors, especially after the Corona. It was terrible. In 2006, the crash, it was one of the first crash of a bubble, like the first bubble actually in the Saudi stock market. And it was terrible. A lot of people got affected. A lot of people lost their savings. They lost like long time savings. But then now after like almost 20 years, I think that like we have a new generation of investors, and I can see them like especially the ones that invested through mutual funds, because they're the ones like pushing, like keeping the market from rebounding right now in Saudi, because they're doing the redemption from those public mutual funds. But other than that, I think no, I don't think people remember that anymore. Oh yeah, I was like, I think that they still have good memories from the coronavirus economic lock period back then, and all the rebound and all the profits that were made back.
To what extent are local investors drawn towards, the triple Qs in the S&P 500 in the US, which has so much, obviously it's got incredible performance recently. And, there's a real cult that's emerged behind investing and having exposure there. So, as much as a new generation of investors is great for Saudi, I'm wondering how much they're getting distracted by the ability to invest from Saudi into the rest of the world.
Well, I think the introduction of robo-advisory a few years ago started that wave of Saudi investors getting involved in the U.S., get more involved. In the U.S. market. I see a lot in the conversation, like whether it's on the internet or in close communities and stuff. There's a lot of talk about investing in ETFs, dividend funds, trading options, futures, derivatives, in general. I can see a lot of them, and the numbers are crazy. Like every year, every month, talk about billions, hundreds of billions. In reals, of course, it's not dollars, being invested in the States. But yeah, and it's like a new trend, like you just described it, and it's caused from those, especially among retail, those robo-advisory platforms that started introducing the diversified portfolio that had gold and ETFs in it, like including the standard SP 500 ETFs.
To everybody watching, we'd love to hear from you. So drop a comment below. Also, take a moment to hit that like button. We'd very much appreciate that. So one part of the portfolio is, of course, stocks. The other would be bonds. And so I'm wondering why you're telling clients to add there. Any preference for, local currency paper in Saudi Riyal? Do you go with US dollar hard currency? Do you go with sukuks?
For Saudis, I mean, like in Saudi, I think this is probably the best time to get involved in fixed income, because the amount of sukuk, which is Islamic bonds, is being issued. This is unprecedented, and the boom in the real estate sector, building and developing, along with the government, is actually creating a big growth in that sector, and it's going to keep growing for the next, I would say, decade or so. It's because it's still new, it's still emerging, and with the securitization now, with for the some of the the mortgages, the bank mortgages and all, will even add to that growth even further. So yeah, so fixed income in Saudi is amazing, but and it's the best time to jump on the wagon for that.
Yeah, I mean, I love the terminology. Amazing. I rarely hear that in the investment world, apart from Dan Ives with his calls on on Tesla and Nvidia. Probably Nvidia would be his amazing call. All right. So in terms of rate cuts, Mohammed, I mean, how many are we going to get from the Fed over the next 12 months? Do you have any strong view? Because ultimately that affects what happens in Saudi as well, right? There's a real transmission mechanism through the US dollar peg, right? So what the Fed does matters to Saudi, it matters to the Gulf.
Well, you see, that's the funny part here. It's like there's a big debate of what's going to happen. But I mean, because of the interventions and the stuff that Trump is doing with the Fed and all, I think once that ends, we will go back and focus on the most important things that could influence the trade, the direction of the interest rates. And honestly, I think once, the next 6 months or so, I can see there's going to be several cuts, not because of course, part of it is dealing with the inflation and all, and the economic growth, but it's like what might happen after November elections. In my opinion, all the support for the market that it's getting from Trump and the administration is related to politics, and once that ends after the election, and I think it's going to be a different direction for the markets. And when that happens, we're probably gonna start picking up the pieces from falling. I wouldn't say it's a falling; it's maybe like a sharp.
Okay. Let's just break down a timeline here.
Yeah.
Just, because that's a big call to make.
Yeah.
So you're saying that they're going all out to juice up markets right ahead of the elections.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're saying there's going to be a moment of reckoning, right? So that happens after the elections because they have to balance the books and they have to, what's going to be the trigger for them to stop juicing markets after the election?
I think it's because there's no need to keep there's no need to keep people not distracted from the elections, because I think the Republicans are trying to keep control, and I think Trump is trying to help them to achieve that. So whatever he's doing, trying to push the Fed, trying to push the tax bills and the tax cuts and all, he's trying to keep that away from affecting the elections, because if they lose control, the Republicans, then it's going to be a bit difficult for the president in terms of his policies. And part of his policies is it's related to the financial markets. So after the election, I think it's not going to matter anymore whether to keep the market up or from going into consolidation or a correction or whatever, because the market is not supposed to go higher. The growth rates the growth of the profits of these companies, of course, they're still growing, but there's a diminishing growth in that. You probably heard a lot of analysts talking about a possible recession and all. I think we're past that, because there was a tax cut. There's a lot of incentives to the economy that was presented early this year. Of course, the tariffs kind of like put some kind of distraction to that, I would call it. Yeah, but if something will happen to the market, it's just going to be a normal consolidation correction because there's still growth.
And then, so when that happens, then the Fed's going to cut to try and save the economy. Is that what you're saying? So just to get an answer to the question. So how many cuts have you baked in? Are we talking 3 or 4 or 6 or 7 over the next 12 months?
I think I wouldn't be surprised if it's like, if we have 100 points cut within the next 12 months.
Okay. And then would that, like, I mean, if somebody's looking at investment opportunities in the kingdom, is that going to, what is that net positive most for stocks, or is it going to be even more positive for property? Right? You brought this up before. There's a significant new law in January 2026 that's going to allow foreign nationals to own property in designated areas. So if you take that big legal change and you take the Fed chopping interest rates by 100, 150 bips, right?
Yeah.
Sounds to me like I shouldn't be looking at Saudi stocks. It sounds to me like I should be looking at Saudi property. I'm not saying I will be, but like out of the two.
You're right. You're right. Absolutely right. I mean, like, you need to, because the Saudi, like, I have been talking to you about it like over 10 years ago, I think. We talked about the real estate sector in Saudi is that it's still emerging. We just had back then in 2017 and 18 the mortgage model was just being implemented, and for that reason, I think there's going to be more than 1 trillion riyals added into the economy just from the real estate sector, and within the next 10 years, and that would be financed by mortgage securities. They'll be financed by sukuk, people investing, and yeah, I mean, like, Saudi is like still. I wouldn't say it's catching up. It's just starting its real estate boom, and most of the regulations are actually encouraging that. It's in benefit of the real estate sector, not necessarily the prices, but
Yeah, I mean, do you think that there are enough guardrails in place? Because booms often bring with them busts, even in the biggest markets in the world, right? You know what happened in China, you know what happened in the US, and it's going to happen in Saudi. So you're saying what's going to happen in Saudi? That there will be a bust if things grow as fast?
We will have a bubble first and then a bust.
Yeah.
So, a bust comes after a bubble. So we need a bubble first. And I think we're still like not even halfway into the sector cycle yet, into that bubble.
And then gold at record highs. Historically, that tends to happen when there's something major, right? A shock that is in the pipeline. I'm thinking January 1980. You had September 2011 during the European sovereign debt crisis. I remember gold was just under $2,000, and then it kind of took the ride back down over a very long time. Should investors be buying gold at these prices today, or has that ship sailed? And what comes next?
For gold, it's never sailed, honestly, because the global economy is still growing. Countries are still creating more money and incentives and spending, and because of that, inflation will continue rising. The question is that how long does it take for the gold prices to go up? The last rise of the gold prices I think they kind of like it didn't take much time like it used to. So that means, I don't know if it's related to inflation or just concern that things kind of get like worse afterwards, or it's just retail buying into gold like through different means or vehicles or derivatives. We don't know. I mean, it's like, honestly, because it's like, it went up this like with the same amount compared to the past 10 years in just a short period of time. So yeah, I mean, like, there's something significant happening, especially when Trump took over this year. It's just we're just gonna have to wait until until after November to see what's gonna happen, including gold.
I mean, between gold and sort of cryptocurrencies, what's more popular in Saudi Arabia? I mean, from my understanding, crypto is not illegal per se, but the government's not come out and endorsed it either. And in that sense, they're behind compared to, say, the virtual asset regulator in Dubai or what's happening with ADGM. What kind of activity are you seeing there, or could there be an announcement in the pipeline?
Well, I'm glad they're behind, and I wish Saudis stay behind for crypto, unless it's closed and it's in Saudi, because it's I think it's a trap for any country other than the
Okay,
US.
so why is it a trap? Tell us more.
Well, crypto is not a regulated market, so I wouldn't be surprised.
It got regulated in the US. It's getting regulated in different parts of the world. But are you talking about Saudi specifically now?
It's not yet. They have not started and finished, and completed the regulations in the US yet. So it's just, they just approved it, but it didn't go into the pipeline yet to kind of really become, even if it does, or if it's there already, then as I told you, it's only going to benefit the the US market, financial markets in general. But the rest of the countries is just going to suck out all the money from them, because it's like, it's not a normal asset. It's still not regulated because it's traded globally. Okay. And I don't think there's any regulatory body that could actually monitor and see what's happening. I can see from reading the risks and the volatility and the history of crypto, like Bitcoin, that there's no consistency in it. There's no obvious behavior related to fundamentals. It only reacts to people gambling, I would say.
Well, I mean, there's a fair number of people out there who disagree with that vehemently.
Absolutely.
for a good reason. And you've got people far smarter than me, at BlackRock, for example, adopting Bitcoin and Ethereum in some of their products, and some of the other institutional players, right? I get if retail is one thing, but once institutional comes in and say, you know what, we're beginning to work with these things, that shows that there's a level of maturity to it. I want to get to what you're doing at Racine Capital, and if you could tell us a bit more about how you're differentiating your offerings from what is a very competitive marketplace.
Right. Racine is a fee-based wealth management, and we take it really seriously to kind of work with the client and work on their behalf and for their interests. We see that most of wealth management market in the region, maybe in Saudi as well, they focus more on selling products than just providing a proper advisory, where you would look at the interest and the plans and the cash flow and everything else that's related to the client. So our approach is that instead of selling the products to the clients that don't fit those products, we will work first with the clients, find out what products fit them, and then match them to it as agents, but not as marketplace or as sales. What's our approach into investments? We think that yes, the stock market is amazing, but in Saudi private markets, I think it's probably going to be the best option for investments in Saudi for the next 20 to 30 years. And not just talking about a debt, VC and private equity, and it's not just sectors related to governments or like initiatives and stuff. There are things related to AI. I think that it's going to take a very good lead the next few years in the sector. That's where we think that the investment going to go.
So you just got your new license, and I'm wondering what the plans are for Racine Capital going forward as you look kind of a 3 to 5 year plan.
Okay, so we're looking to make Racine like an AI first company. A lot of the activities that used to be done by humans we're creating agents for that, and that's to complement as well the growing the asset management sector in Saudi. One of the things that we are focused on in the next few months is introducing the first human-like AI agent that would have a proper conversation with the clients and show them, guide them, and educate them how to invest and where to invest, and then introduce and connect that to most of the products offered by managers in the region, including our products as well. And then from that, we're even gonna create analyst agents and some not in several sectors, private, public markets, and all types.
Yeah, so I look forward to looking at some of the prototypes, see how it works in practice. So I'll make sure to stop by and give it a go. I mean, given that, this is still a relatively young company compared to some of your peers, what has it been like starting this business in the kingdom, and what do you think could be done better for from a government point of view that's looking to, refine and polish?
Well, well, there's two sides of it. Of course, I mean, setting up the company and getting the people, getting the resources and everything. I think this is probably the best time for Saudis or entrepreneurs in Saudi to start their business in Saudi, because there's all kind of subsidies, there are all kind of changes in the regulations, improvement, deregulation and regulating to some of the sectors that provided actually more opportunities for participants in those markets. But at the same time, because the effort is it's provided to a lot of people, then that's a kind of like crowding, the markets and creating very intense competition. But then there are some challenges into dealing with the size of the markets, the changes in regulations, the speed and this, and the synergy between the institutions in terms of how either producing subsidies or dealing with regulating some of the sectors that these companies are involved in. And I think most of those companies involved in fintech are the ones that has the most tough, I would say, and complicated.
Okay.
Yeah, it started though, but it's starting a company in general. So being an entrepreneur, that's a tough job, I would tell you. You don't want to do it.
What's the most surprising thing about being a CEO that nobody told you before you started?
That you are not just a CEO, you're all the C-level when you start. And the best achievement they will do over time is being able to fire yourself from all these jobs as you grow.
I want to get to a bit of a personal segment in terms of What inspired you to get into finance?
Well, since the beginning of my career, I've been involved in finance, but I was mostly trading and speculating more than anything. And of course, watching all those movies growing up, Wall Street and all, that makes you like that kind of I wouldn't say like, but that's interaction and that's drama into that market of being able to kind of like beat the market and beat the trends. But as we grow, as we go through different stages of life, so I think that there are different, I would say, responsibilities or duties from people to kind of like to help build and improve the market. So one of the things that actually made me go back and set up being an entrepreneur again and set up is that the whole transformation in Saudi was about, abandoning socialist policies and going and providing all those subsidies directly to people. And if you look at it, people haven't done any wealth, haven't used any advisory or haven't done anything by themselves directly to kind of like grow their wealth. That the government was kind of taking care of it for them, but now it's not. It's them. They have to take care of that themselves.
What would you say was the greatest struggle in your life? It could be in your personal life, could be in your career over the years that's kind of shaped you to be the person you are today.
Well, there's a lot of things that a lot of struggles actually we went through, but of course we can't talk about all of them. But I think that the most significant one is when you're still betting on your beliefs and your goals and being persistent, even though everything is against you. So the struggle to get from point A to point B when it's nearly impossible. Okay, when you look at it and think it's impossible, but it happens. Okay, that's the point, which is like that's the part that I would say the worst part of the struggle of setting up a company is that when you realize that going from point A and B is going to be impossible, and then you keep persisting, you keep, focused. Not, I would say focused because you're going to be distracted, although that's the trouble in there. But then we just keep moving and it happens. But yeah, I think that's if you happen to get to that point, that's when you know that the struggle is real for entrepreneurs.
That's a fantastic point to wrap up on. Mohammed, it's been a real pleasure to overlap again, and I look forward to connecting again in Riyadh very soon.
Inshallah. Same ways, and it was great connecting and happy to meet with you, inshallah, when you come to Riyadh.
Thank you for listening to You're in Business. If you've enjoyed the conversation, like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.